Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Webcast, Return to Office with Microsoft Teams and Cloud Video Interop, sponsored by BlueJeans by Verizon. I'm Tracy Cook with RedmondMag.com, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, let me cover a few housekeeping details. We're hosting a Q&A session after the presentation, so please get your questions ready, and we'll answer as many as we can. BlueJeans by Verizon has provided some resources for your review. Please check them out on the console. Please take a look. And finally, this entire webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing, and we'll send you an email when the replay is available, and that should be in about 24 hours. And now on to the webcast. Scott Becker, editorial director for RedmondMag.com, will be moderating today's event. Joining Scott is Zach Bosin, Vice President of Product Marketing and Communications at BlueJeans by Verizon. Zach is responsible for shaping and executing the go-to-market strategy for BlueJeans' award-winning meetings platform. So we're in great shape today. I'm real interested to see what's going to come of it. And Scott, please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And I'm also really excited for today's session because it hits on so many issues that are really important to all of us right now, related to remote work, the explosion of Teams usage, questions about how and when to get back to work, either returning to the office or rotating some people in and staying, mostly remote. And then how to integrate all those new Teams users in with existing conference hardware that you might already have. So, now that everyone's ensconced in their remote environments for now, it's really about what's next. And for an overview of that, I can't think of anybody better than our guest, Zach Bosin from BlueJeans by Verizon. So, Zach, welcome.
Awesome, Scott. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just do a quick intro here. And if you're not familiar with BlueJeans, BlueJeans has been around for about 10 years. We're a video conferencing platform. We also offer a webinar solution, room system offerings. And the solution we're going to be talking about a little bit later today is the BlueJeans Gateway for Microsoft Teams. And so we've been in this industry for a long time and have developed some expertise when it comes to remote work because we've been pioneering in that for many years. But I think, as Scott mentioned, what we're really interested in talking about today is some of the considerations for thinking about what's next. And it's been very uncertain the past 7 months, how we're going to be productive in a work from home type of environment and how we're going to be productive going forward. And so that's really where we're going to spend our time initially, and hopefully we'll get some good questions and excited to dig in with everyone. So let's kick it off. Just in terms of an agenda, really want to just start out with some context setting around the idea behind what a hybrid workforce program might look like and some of the drivers that are pushing organizations to consider that approach. Think about some of those considerations of how to be prepared to start bringing folks back into the office. And then pivoting into talking more about Microsoft Teams, thinking about Teams from a conference room perspective, and then introduce our solution and talk about a new category of offerings called Cloud Video Interop, which really helps organizations leverage their existing hardware technology to connect to Microsoft Teams meetings. And so that's how we're going to wrap it up today. So let's dive in. Now, as I mentioned, uncertainty has kind of been the name of the game over the past few months. And it's been fantastic to watch organizations adopt this work from home mentality. It's been a giant experiment. And I think, more or less, it's been relatively productive for knowledge workers who've been sent home and have been working that way for the past 7 months. Now, what I've laid out here is what is the conventional wisdom, if you will, for how organizations are going to think through bringing individuals back into the office. So today, we're in this work from home environment where pretty much all of your knowledge workers are remote. You have some essential workers who are probably heading into the office, maybe to do IT type initiatives, maybe to check on the servers, maybe to do general maintenance. But more or less, most of the meetings that are being hosted are virtual meetings today. Now, when we think about what that next step looks like, that's what we're calling the hybrid workforce. And that's where we have a small portion of the workforce who's going to be entering back into the office. And perhaps you'll have dedicated teams who are assigned to come in on specific days. Maybe you'll have a 1 week on, 1 week off type policy. maybe you're just going to bring in those workers that need to do more collaborative work. But there's going to be firm guidelines in place in terms of who can come back to the office and who should remain back at home. And there's going to be some ceiling caps in terms of that office occupancy that are really dictated by the square footage that you have. The most important thing maybe here in this stage is giving employees choice, making sure that those employees who want to come back in the office and feel like it's going to improve their productivity, that they have the opportunity to do so. Whereas some employees may not feel that it's safe and they're not interested in taking that type of risk. And so you need to think through a flexible policy that will enable that hybrid workforce to be productive in the way that those employees prefer to work. Looking out further, and this is where things do get a little bit more foggy, is that new normal experience, and what are the implications of that new normal experience? And I think if there's one thing that has become clear, it's that the workspaces of yesterday will not be suitable going forward. Today's workspaces have more of a structured format. They're designed for a singular way of working. What we see going out into the future is a more modular concept, which is adaptable and flexible depending on the needs of the time. If, God forbid, there's another pandemic or any other issues, we want to think through ways that the work structure, the workplace that's there, can be moved around and adapt to the environment that needs. So that's going to be significantly different than the way that we think through workspaces today. Remote work is not going anywhere. It is going to be here to stay, and maybe minimum 2 days a week, employees will choose to work from home to experience some of the benefits that they have today. And so ensuring that the space that your organization acquires to have office space, that will be dictated by how many employees are coming in. And so there's going to be a different consideration set for how much office space you actually require. I think what's interesting is that, there is this demand for in-person meetings, and in that new normal, there is going to be a desire for people to gather. And so how do you think about your workspaces and your office spaces and your collaboration spaces in thinking through how is it adaptable? How is it modular? How do we do scheduling, and how do we make it all work and come together? But that's pretty far off. I think where we need to spend our time today is thinking about the hybrid workforce and what are the more near-term implications for facilities managers and IT managers and HR teams as we pursue this next stage. And so to do that, we have identified some really interesting research from one of our partners here at Slack. And this research came out a couple months ago, but I think it's super relevant. And so what Slack did is they introduced, as part of their Frontiers program, this Future Forum, which is a new kind of think tank initiative to really help organizations start to wrap their arms around the future of work. And as a key component of that, they launched a survey, and that survey went out to 9,000 individuals, with about 4,700 of them who are currently working remotely. And one of the big questions that they asked these individuals is, if you had your druthers and you could decide what your work style was going to be going forward, would you want to work remotely forever? Would you want to only come back into the office, or do you want to have some type of hybrid approach? And I think, this is very telling, which is, across this global population, 4,700 survey participants, 3/4 of the survey respondents said that they wanted more of a hybrid option, where they wanted to have flexibility, where they wanted to be able to come into the office when they needed to, but also reserve the right to work from home. And I think that makes sense. And most of us have experienced many of these benefits of working from home over the past few months. Number one, and I think you hear this kind of echoing from everyone, I don't have to commute any longer. Personally, I live in the Bay Area, so my commute required driving to drop off my kids at daycare. Then I had to park in a parking lot. Then I had to go to the BART station, take a BART into San Francisco, walk to the office. And, that ate up a good 2 hours of my day. Well, I don't have to do that anymore, and I get that time back. And then you get to spend that time back however you want. Maybe it's working, maybe it's doing other things. So I think that's a key benefit that anyone who's working remotely is going to want to retain to some degree. Now, you also get to save money if you're not spending on those commuting fees or you're eating at home. Those are nice benefits. The improved work-life balance, being able to spend more time with family, maybe being able to exercise in the middle of the day, which is something you weren't able to do when you were kind of cranking through a 9-to-5 day at the office. All of these things contribute to that desire to have the optionality to continue to work from home. And really, the Remote Employee Experience Index is part of the survey, and they use that, and I apologize if it's kind of small on the screen, but what they did is they tried to identify, if you were comparing your work from home experience to your previous office-only experience, which is better? And what was interesting is that a lot of things that we've talked about were identified as being better: your work-life balance, having less stress, being more productive as working from home. All of those are positive indicators that remote work is great. But what's interesting is the one negative that the index called out was this feeling that you don't have a sense of belonging, that you're missing some type of communal kinship with your colleagues, and missing out on collaborative opportunities and collective work. Maybe it's that seeing the people by the water cooler. Maybe it is just having meetings in person and feeling that human connection. Either way, it was the one critical downfall that over the past few months, the folks that took this survey identified as one of the key challenges of the remote work experience. And as this survey calls out, is one of the major drivers behind this interest in having a hybrid option. There was another interesting set of data that came from ServiceNow, and this was actually just released about a week ago, and it plays on some of these similar themes, and I think it helps us to understand this hybrid mentality. Now, what this survey did, which was slightly different than the Slack survey, is it tried to understand what are some of the additional challenges that individuals are having with remote work. And what it calls out is that 93% of business executives and 83% of individual contributors agree that there are some concerns about being solely remote going forward. And similar to the Slack survey, one of the majority opinions was that collaboration is hard. It's hard to actually connect with my colleagues and do great work. But what executives also called out as concerning in the remote model is concerns around being able to continue to deliver your products or your services in a timely fashion. And that's very alarming for executives who are trying to maintain business continuity in a very uncertain economic climate. And so I think what you have happening as a result of some of these feelings is more pressure to think about getting back into the office, both from the employee standpoint as well as from the executive standpoint. And just to kind of highlight the survey participants here, we had 900 executives take the survey and 8,100 individual contributors. And so the other really interesting takeaway is what we have on the right side. And this gets back to, okay, well, it sounds like we're struggling to keep our teams connected, and there's feelings of isolation. Collaboration is somewhat diminished by the remote work scenario, and we're concerned about delivering products and services on time. Okay, well, if we move to bring people back into the office, what's the sentiment towards that? And what this survey identified is that a large portion of both executives and individual contributors are concerned that their business and their company don't have their safety interests top of mind, and that there's concerns that businesses will prioritize business continuity in terms of maintaining operations, or they will not take all the necessary steps to keep their employees safe. And that's very concerning. And so I think there's really an interesting cocktail of ideas here where clearly remote is great from a work-life standpoint, but there's some real struggles in terms of building a sense of community, in terms of feeling confident that you're going to be able to deliver your products and your services. And maybe most importantly, the safety of your employees is something that right now is not very well communicated, or employees aren't necessarily confident that the organization is going to have their best interests at hand. And so if we do want to bring people back into the office in this hybrid structure, what are some of the critical things then that we need to think about to have a successful hybrid program? Well, for me, there's basically kind of three core takeaways. Number one is that there's clearly a desire for hybrid. So organizations really need to craft a flexible policy that enables employees to choose what works best for them. If they want to head back into the office, enable them to do so, let them do so, but you have to think through all the considerations to deliver that for them. Number two, you need to make sure that employees are enabled and empowered to have successful work at home or in office productivity. And that means having the right technology, having the right applications, having the right tools at their fingertips, regardless of where they are, to be successful. And third, and maybe most importantly, coming from that ServiceNow report, is that ensure that your efforts to keep employees safe are paramount, and they're transparent, and that you're effectively communicating what that safety plan looks like to ensure that folks that want to come back into the office feel comfortable and confident and safe that that's the right decision for them. And I just want to take a couple minutes on that final point to highlight some work that's been done by a new nonprofit group called Workplace 2030, and they've been working with an epidemiologist to try and map out a decision framework for organizations to think through what are the key considerations for bringing folks back into the office. And I know there's a lot on this chart, and hopefully if you're interested, you can download this presentation as one of the resources and use this as a guide to your process. But really kind of there's four big buckets here that this group recommends. Number one is just understanding your local risk. Obviously, if you have a hotspot situation going on with the virus, might not be a great time to bring people back into the office. But here's some of the things you want to think about when you're looking at that local risk. Number one, where do all of your employees live that are commuting? If you can define that catchment area, then you can start to track the progress of the spread of the virus or perhaps the diminishment of the virus in that location. But you need to really outline and understand where employees are going to be coming from as a baseline. And from a metric standpoint, what you want to be looking at is local case numbers, the positivity rate in that location, as well as the overall healthcare capacity in terms of if an outbreak occurs, are hospitals ready to handle it? And so it's pretty straightforward. I don't know about everyone out there. Our local newspaper is tracking this information, but it needs to be part of your workflow when thinking about how we're going to bring people back to the office. Do we have clear line of sight into this data? Are we tracking it at an organizational level? Are we sharing it with our employees? Are we creating that transparency and visibility? I think it's an important set of data that needs to be bubbled up and focused on. But there's also some interesting takeaways in terms of the non-numeric milestones. So thinking about other things that are happening within the community. Are schools reopening? Is indoor dining starting to take root? Are we starting to expand more capacity in terms of restaurants? All of those things combined will give you a picture of what the local risk looks like and give you an assessment of, okay, I think we're ready to move into the next step and start to bring folks back into the office and try out this hybrid approach. Now, once you have that good visibility of what's happening from a risk standpoint, there's some real kind of fundamental things that you need to do in terms of preparing your infrastructure. And I mentioned this earlier. You need to think about your office capacity, the folks that are coming back in, as dictated by social distancing guidelines. If everyone needs to stay 6 feet apart when they're in the office, how many employees can you actually fit in the office? And you need to have that well documented and understood and make sure that you've got good governance around what those guidelines are. Thinking about having possibly physical barriers. If you can't implement social distancing guidelines, can you put a piece of plexiglass up from the waist up to the ceiling? Do you have the right air filtration, air purification systems? Are you able to open the windows and open the doors? Those are important considerations. Have you implemented any types of touchless technology? Is that a good opportunity in terms of upgrading the workspace is another key consideration. And then finally, just making sure that the cleaning policy is focused on those high touch point areas, making sure that those are cleaned throughout the day. Now, it's not just about having the infrastructure, of course. It's important to ensure that employees are taking the guidelines seriously, and when they're in the office, have a good set of behaviors that they know to follow. And so, of course, social distancing is important. The recommendation is that face masks should be worn indoors, except for when employees are eating or drinking. Making sure that you have a good policy around screening employees when they're coming into the office, doing temperature checks, asking them surveys to understand any types of risky behavior that may be early symptoms. And just, again, thinking through kind of where employees should be eating. If there's a cafeteria, you don't want your employees eating there. You want to have them either eating at their desks or eating outside if that's possible. So those are some new guidelines that you want to be clearly communicating to employees that are deciding to come back into the office. Now, obviously, this is a significant change. And with any big change requires proactive change management. And thinking about it from a leadership standpoint, are we doing a good cadence of all hands meetings, of town hall type meetings? We're giving the employees clear guidance and clear direction, and we're also leading by example. So I think it's important to ensure that, just like any change management initiative, the leaders are out front doing their best to communicate the situation and also doing their best to represent these new policies when they're back in the office. And so really all of this ties back to transparency and making sure that you've got a really strong plan in place so that your employees who want to come back into the office feel confident and they're not part of that 60% who's skeptical that their organization is potentially not putting their safety as something that's of critical importance. So I think these are important considerations and obviously add to the complexity of moving more towards a hybrid model, but obviously give you some good guidelines to think through, well, what do we need to do to be prepared? Now, I think from a BlueJeans standpoint, while we're qualified to talk about all of these issues, I think that what we're most qualified to really provide guidance on is this central bucket. And this is around enabling your employees to work at home effectively or come back into the office without disruption. Obviously, we're a technology vendor, we're a conferencing vendor. Collaboration is our sweet spot. And so I'd really like to spend the rest of our time focusing in on these topics and really focusing on how Microsoft Teams can be enabled in the conference rooms to ensure business continuity and employee productivity in the hybrid workplace. And so here's something that I'm sure and confident everyone is familiar with. Teams is working pretty well for remote workers. The explosive adoption of Teams has been an incredible thing to watch, but maybe even more interesting for me as a competitor as well as a partner of Microsoft's is the pace of innovation to enable remote employees, to enable remote and distance learning environments, to really create a feature set that is very innovative, and the pace of delivery has just been fun to watch, quite honestly. And so I think it's well known that Teams has started to really ramp up their delivery, and whether that's expanding to gallery mode, getting to a 7x7, getting to together mode, starting to invest in at-home hardware devices that create kind of a secondary video conferencing experience, a purpose-built experience, rolling out more and more features, reactions, raise hand, engagement features. All of it has been, I think, really well adopted, and I think it's helped to create a real ecosystem of support around Microsoft Teams. And I think what's important to recognize is that the behavior has changed. Teams has been adopted. When we were talking about Teams a year ago, what Microsoft was asking us for partnership around was to try and help organizations kick off their adoption journey. Well, the coronavirus has basically forced us into rapid cycling through that adoption period, and now we're starting to think about phase 2 and phase 3 adoption. And that phase 2 adoption is, well, okay, if everyone's very familiar with Teams, it's become part of our workflow, it's become how we are productive, that as we start to think through that next phase of returning to the office, how do we ensure that Teams is represented in our conference rooms and in our offices so that we're not missing out on opportunities for enhanced collaboration? And that's where we start to see kind of this bifurcation of options, really. And for those of you that aren't familiar with those options, this is basically how it sets up. Microsoft has partnered with some hardware vendors to create purpose-built native Microsoft Teams rooms. And so Crestron, Logitech, Lenovo, those are some examples of vendors who've put together these native hardware kits. They run a purpose-built Teams OS on that tablet, on the hardware device, and right out of the box, they are configured to work with Microsoft Teams and leverage all of the functionality that Teams is built into them. Obviously, the requirement there is that if your organization does not already have these Microsoft Teams room kits, then they need to be purchased, they need to be acquired, they need to be set up and deployed. On the flip side, what Microsoft has done is they've created something called Cloud Video Interop, which is effectively a third-party solution that allows legacy hardware systems or existing conference room systems that are from Cisco or Poly or Lifesize. These are standards-based systems, so using SIP or H.323. And what Cloud Video Interop does, it allows those legacy hardware systems to connect to Microsoft Teams meetings. And so really there's two options here then. And the best way to kind of figure out what option you should choose and what path you should choose to enable your conference rooms is to ask a really basic set of questions. And this is certainly not rocket science, but I think it's important to start thinking through what your approach should be as you consider bringing Microsoft Teams into your office for this hybrid work environment. Number one, do you have existing hardware in your conference rooms? I think that there is some data out there from a couple years ago, and I think it's probably not necessarily 100% accurate anymore, but really the percentage of conference rooms that are video enabled is not as high as one would consider. I think it's only less than 10% of conference rooms actually have video-enabled hardware in them. And so, but for many organizations, they did adopt in some hardware. And so the question you have to understand is, okay, which of our rooms already have existing hardware? And, is that the direction that we want to go because we've already made those investments? So the second question you have to ask is, okay, do we want to enable Teams meetings on that existing hardware, or do we want to invest in more of a rip and replace strategy where we want to go and purchase the new Microsoft Teams rooms? And so if we do have hardware, do we want to continue using it, or do we want to invest in the new Microsoft Teams rooms? And then third is thinking maybe a different type of consideration, which is, okay, the Microsoft Teams rooms are purpose-built to run Microsoft Teams, and they're starting to create an ecosystem to do some guest join access with third-party vendors. But really, the legacy hardware, the legacy SIP and H.323 hardware, is designed to be a little bit more extensible, and it can work with Microsoft Teams, but also Zoom and Cisco and BlueJeans and other conferencing services. So what is the appetite for your organization to be more narrowly focused on Microsoft Teams, or do you want to have more flexibility and adaptability and be able to connect to different services? Because maybe in certain offices, you have a lot of sales reps or you have HR teams, and they're going to be doing more external types of meetings. And in that case, you may have more of a desire to work with different services. So at the end of the day, if you're able to answer yes, we have existing hardware, we want to enable Teams on that existing hardware, and we also want to ensure that we can connect to different video conferencing services through that hardware, then Cloud Video Interop is a great option. And Cloud Video Interop is pretty straightforward. At the end of the day, it's a middleware that connects, it's a software middleware that connects Microsoft Teams meetings to these legacy hardware endpoints. Now, what's important to recognize about the market is that Microsoft has partnered with 4 companies to deliver this service on their behalf. BlueJeans, our company, is one of them. Pexip, an organization that's based out of Europe, is another. And then Poly and Cisco have also deployed CVI solutions. And so it's a really interesting set of partners for Microsoft, and each partner has its own strengths. As you can imagine, Poly and Cisco, obviously, they've got a lot of their own hardware that's out there, and so they've built kind of a custom approach for their endpoints. Pexip has an interesting model where they can go more of an on-premises type of deployment if you have more of an interest in that type of deployment option. And on BlueJeans, we have more of a pure SaaS option. So while everything does similar things, I will highlight the fact that there are some unique differences between each of those 4 vendors, and they're all worthy of consideration, descending on what your hardware infrastructure estate looks like. Now, all of them will provide 3 benefits, which is important to consider. Number 1, Cloud Video Interop allows you to optimize your existing investments in standard-based endpoints. As we talked about earlier, we have a lot of economic uncertainty, and I think what your business needs to think about is, do we have an appetite for spending more dollars on bringing in new hardware, or do we want to try and extend the useful life of our existing endpoints and put a CVI solution on them so we can keep using that hardware to bring Teams into our offices? The second is really around the time spent. Going out and acquiring 10, 100 new endpoints is time consuming. It's expensive. From a resource standpoint, you're investing a lot in sourcing that hardware in terms of setting it up, in terms of managing it. And obviously, it's hard to do all of those things right now when most individuals are working from home. And so thinking through how much time do I want to invest in those types of projects versus doing more of a software-based solution with CVI. And third, all of these Cloud Video Interop solutions are going to provide that seamless experience to enter a Teams meeting at the touch of a button and create consistency across all of the different conference rooms. So really being able to ensure that those conference rooms are Teams enabled is going to be great for those hybrid workers who are coming in and want to keep having collaboration opportunities and keep engaging in meetings with all the rest of their remote team members. And that is the most important thing, is that you're not disrupting the business as you have folks starting to come back into the office. Now, I did want to take the opportunity to highlight a little bit more around the differentiation of the BlueJeans Gateway for Microsoft Teams. As I mentioned, this is a pure SaaS solution. There are no on-premises components. In addition, we have the ability to work with over 19,000 different hardware configurations. So for those of you that have been tracking BlueJeans since our inception about 10 years ago, interoperability is something that's at our core. BlueJeans was designed to connect conference room systems to video conferencing applications. And so it's something that we've always held near and dear to our heart. And I believe that we do have the broadest coverage in terms of connecting all of the endpoints that are out there that are H.323 and SIP. And because of that expertise, what we've built from a CVI standpoint is pretty straightforward. We believe that we have a solution that's easier to deploy, easier to manage, and at the end of the day, easier to use. Now, because it's a pure SaaS model, everything is based in the Azure cloud. You can be up and running in 30 minutes. We've built a wizard that really walks you through 4 discrete steps to actually get up and running. And that process is very differentiated from the other 3 competitors in the market who have a longer POC cycle, or if you're dealing with heterogeneous components, it takes a little bit longer to set up. And so if you're looking for a solution that's more hands-off and is really quick to implement, BlueJeans is superior in that standpoint. Because we're pure SaaS, the manageability is also a little bit different. There's no virtual machines to manage. We have basically the ability to scale infinitely through our cloud infrastructure. There is no downtime for updates, or we have no outages. We have global failover. So the infrastructure that we've put behind this solution is way more hands-off than something that's more on-premises. In addition to that, if you're familiar with BlueJeans, we offer Command Center, which is our single pane of glass management console that allows you to understand the performance of your cloud video interop solution. It helps you understand in every Teams meeting what the call characteristics of that meeting were and what the overall user satisfaction was with the CVI solution. So Command Center is a really powerful tool for administrators to understand how the implementation is going. And then third, from an easier to use standpoint, because we offer this native one-touch join experience, anyone coming into the office can easily touch a button and join a meeting. And that's included without any additional licenses. It's part of our bundle. And so we have no hidden fees and no hidden agenda. BlueJeans is straightforward. It's easy to deploy, easy to manage, and easy to use. And one other kind of key thing I wanted to highlight for everyone is that it's easy to try. So what you can do, if you're interested, is you can head over to our website, bluejeans.com, and click on our gateway page here. And we really give you a couple options right out of the gate just to get the experience. Because we're pure SaaS, we have the ability to empower people to really take it for a spin today. And so we've got 2 options here. One is the test drive. And what the test drive is, we've basically set up a CVI instance, a demo environment, so that if you register for our test drive, we'll send you an invitation to join a Teams meeting. And you can join that Teams meeting on your H.323 or SIP endpoints. You just have to punch in the URI. And so that's a great way for you to demonstrate, hey, on the conference room hardware that you have today, you want to join a Teams meeting? We can do that for you in 5 minutes. It doesn't require any type of deployment or any infrastructure. So that's really the proof in the pudding that this thing works. The next step would be to move into a free trial. And the free trial is a 30-day unlimited trial where you can deploy as many Teams rooms as you want. And it'll walk you through that 4-step wizard process to deploy up and running in 30 minutes and get the full gateway experience. And then if you want to convert into a fully licensed customer, all you have to do is go to our e-commerce store, press buy now, and you can enable those rooms that you used in the trial. It's super straightforward. It's very self-service. It's very hands-off. We try to remove as much of the friction as possible. Now, I will say, if you're interested in enabling more than 20 rooms, we can put you in touch with one of our account managers, and they can walk you through some of the different options that we have for larger deployments. We also have some unique and differentiated pricing models for those larger deployments that may be useful when you're thinking through how to enable the entire organization's conference rooms with Microsoft Teams. So CVI is definitely a piece of the puzzle in terms of bringing folks back into the office and maintaining continuity. I think that if we tie it back to some of the data we were looking at earlier, obviously there's a demand for folks to come back into the office, to regain connections with their colleagues, to improve collaboration, ensure that continuity remains high. And so Teams has clearly been a blockbuster solution over the past few months. And as we think to the future and bringing people back to the office, I just ask you to think through what are some of those key ways that we can ensure that conference rooms are delivering on the promise of bringing folks together. And with that, I say thank you. And Scott, we can open it up for some questions.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds great. Really good stuff, especially some of the data from the Slack and the ServiceNow surveys about remote work. That was really interesting. And those Workplace 2030 guidelines were really, really good. I just echo Zach in saying, be sure to download that presentation, just for that stuff alone, as well as the information on the cloud video interop and in the BlueJeans solution, how it's working, just great stuff. One thing that I also wanted to mention was, you talked about sort of the explosion in Teams and how it's been sort of a blockbuster, and that's something that we track as well. And you mentioned that 75 million daily active users number, which is, it's like it's a big number, but like, the context of it is interesting too, because you were talking about, when the partnership started. I'm not sure when that was, but I know back in July 2019, Microsoft was claiming, like, as a victory, like 13 million daily active users. You know, and so, and then, you know, by November they were up to 20, but that was all, you know, pre like global pandemic stuff. And then, you know, by you know, I think it was March or so, they were up to 44, and then in April they mentioned that 75 million number, and they haven't updated it since. But I imagine it's higher. But then again, it's hard to say, because it's sort of like everybody moved very quickly online, and then, you know, maybe that's the plateau. I don't know. We'll be interested to see the next time Microsoft provides an update. But it just gives you a sense of the actual explosion of that number is you know, many X there. So yeah, really good. And, you know, just talking about all those.
Yeah, the scale is crazy from a video conferencing standpoint, and the industry at large. I mean, at BlueJeans, we overnight saw a 5x uptick in adoption and utilization of the platform. So, you know, and I think it was pretty consistent across all of the vendors. And so trying to meet that demand in real time, there were quite a few late nights in March and April to make sure things were firing on all cylinders. That's for sure.
I'm sure. And, you know, so what's your experience been then since then? Has it been pretty steady in terms of like the usage? Did people kind of like jump up onto the platform and then just stay there, or has it continued to grow?
Yeah, I think that's been our experience, is that right around maybe mid-May, things started to stabilize and have held pretty consistent since then from an adoption and utilization standpoint. And I think what we see now is that, obviously, more on the small business side, you still have folks who are trying different solutions and trying to figure out what works best for them. But that explosive period was really kind of, you know, mid-March through mid-end of May. And then I think decisions were made. And it was then, I think we, you know, most of us in the industry got through kind of the can we scale, and then the innovation really dialed up. And I think that's what we've seen across the board is, okay, now that we've got our core set of users that are using us from a daily remote work standpoint, what are the new features that we need to add to the platform to make it, you know, as great of an experience for everyone who's out there, you know, trying to work from home?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Super. So we did have a couple of questions come in, and once again, if you have questions, just go ahead and type them into the console there, and we'll get to as many as we can. The first thing was just sort of a comment on one of the things that you mentioned. Eating at the desk is so terrible. What culture are we creating here? It's not really a question there, but just, you know. It kind of goes to some of those slides that you had about the, you know, the experience and, you know, how you know, people are reacting to that.
No, I mean, obviously we're all kind of in uncharted territory here. And I think what's interesting is that people are searching, obviously, for that sense of belonging and culture, but you're going to have the limitations of distancing, of mask wearing, of those things that, you know, could also be, you know, culturally not feel like you're getting that same pre-pandemic experience. And I think, you know, there's going to be some give and take, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation. And I think you have to be prepared for that disruption. But clearly, I think, you know, organizations are going to, in hopefully in the near term, try to figure out what's going to work best for them. And I think that one of the points I really liked from the ServiceNow, you know, data was around, well, just leadership, you know, and making sure that the executive team is leading the way in terms of demonstrating, like, this is how we're going to do it, and this is the culture that we want, and let's come up with the policies that drive that. And so I think it is important that a lot of those core change management principles are near and dear to our hearts as we kind of take this journey to the next step.
Right. Here's a question that came in it's a little more technical. How's the experience for the end user if they join with a SIP system?
Yeah, so there's really two experiences. One is a little bit more manual, where you basically are presented with the dial-in information, and you can punch in those numbers and join the meeting. The other is something that we have called BlueJeans Relay, which is really our calendar integration and provides a one-touch join experience. And so the one-touch join experience basically creates the room instance as someone that can join the meeting, as an entity that can join the meeting. And so you're sharing the calendar information there with the room, and you're able to push a green button pretty much on all the different SIP endpoints that have, the capability to have a tablet or a visual display, and you can easily just push that button to join a meeting. There's also remote controls that some of the systems come with, and you can toggle around on that remote control to join the meeting. And so it's pretty straightforward. We always recommend doing the calendar integration because at the end of the day, typing in a code feels very 2005 or so. And so I think people want a more simpler experience. Now, one of the things that we're working on, and vendors are tackling this different ways, whether using voice commands, I think that's definitely a direction that could be in the future, or using your mobile device to join the meeting. So coming into the room and being able to join without having to touch perhaps a shared screen. That's something that we're working on right now for this experience. And the other end user kind of solution is kind of auto joining meetings. And so if you really wanted a hands-free approach, but you didn't have the interest in deploying a voice solution, you can actually set up the conference rooms to start and end at specific times so that people can just walk into meetings and start the meeting as the clock strikes 10 or what have you. So there's different options. I think that people are most familiar with touching a screen, but I think that will evolve. And I think obviously there are going to be safety concerns around that. That needs to be a key part of your safety plan. But there's definitely some flexibility there depending on how your users prefer to join the meeting.
So you're talking about the safety of like virus sort of safety kind of issues?
Yeah, exactly. Just making sure that you're wiping down surfaces. I think that's just something that's going to be on top of everyone's mind when they do come back to the office, those shared spaces. Yeah.
Another one here, Microsoft is coming up with some features that enhance virtual collaboration, like Together Mode. Are we going to see that in the gateway?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Together Mode is awesome innovation. I mean, I love to turn the NBA Finals where you could see celebrities on the sidelines. Absolutely. That's on the roadmap. We are actually going to be delivering the Together Mode integration here in the fourth quarter so that even if you're using a standards-based endpoint, you'll be able to have that same experience. So there's not necessarily, if you want Together Mode, you don't have to go run out and buy a new MTR. You can use CVI to actually deliver that Together Mode in your existing conference rooms, which I think will be pretty cool. And virtual backgrounds and all that stuff work as well using the Cloud Video Interop solution.
And I'm sure the audience probably knows, but for my benefit, MTR, what does that stand for?
Microsoft Teams Room. That's kind of that's the shorthand that they've created. Those native Teams rooms that Lenovo and Crestron folks are building that have that Microsoft Teams operating system built into it.
Gotcha. And
CVI is the Cloud Video Interop that we deliver for the legacy endpoints.
Thank you. And another one here, and this actually kind of goes to some of the points that you made about the competition, but someone mentioned I have some Cisco and Poly systems that I want to connect to Teams. Can the gateway connect Teams to both systems?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the design principles for BlueJeans, is that we want to make sure, a lot of companies have acquired other businesses, or a lot of things have happened over time. You have different locations, and so many organizations have this heterogeneous kind of set of hardware, and you want to make sure that all of those work. You don't want to have only part of your rooms working with Microsoft Teams. And so out of the box, our BlueJeans gateway works with all the different endpoints. I think that if you are looking at CVI solutions from both Poly and Cisco, those are going to be a little bit more oriented towards their proprietary hardware. They also can support heterogeneous environments too. It's just slightly different. Whereas, that was one of our design principles, because we know that a lot of our customers have many different types of hardware that they've acquired over the years. And so we want to make sure that all of that can be put to use, and you can really extend the life of all those different devices.
Is there a sort of a rule of thumb in terms of, when you're talking about sort of those legacy systems, that maybe people got through acquisition or whatever, some of this, meeting room technology is fairly old, now. In terms of the Teams solution, how far back is the backward compatibility, like in terms of like years roughly? Yeah,
so we have customers using old Tandberg systems. 15 years ago, these standards have been around for a while. Yeah. And so BlueJeans developed our interoperability back in 2009. And so if you think, 10 years before that, turning in, 1999, 2000, there were some systems out there that were kind of cutting edge at that point in time, old telepresence systems, things like that. And so, the 19,000 different endpoints that BlueJeans works with, it stretches all the way back as long as you're using the SIP and H.323 standards. So for the most part, I'd say it's, fully backward compatible. And I think there is a lifetime on these things. It's not like you're going to want to hold on to something for 25 years.
Right.
I think what we see is, in terms of most businesses trying to cycle through every 7 years their hardware, but I mean, every business is going to be different based on, what their needs are.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think that about gets to the questions we had from the audience. Any sort of closing thoughts that you had that you wanted to leave people with?
No, I wanted to thank everyone for their time today. I think, these are crazy times. These are somewhat exciting times trying to figure out what's next. And I think it's kind of hard to see through the fog. But it's clear to me that there is a desire to return back to the office. I feel personally a desire to get back to the office in some way or another. And I think collectively what we can do to help individuals regain that sense of community and sense of belonging is going to go a far way in terms of, rebuilding just overall positivity. And it's something I think we could all use these days.
Hey, you know what? And Zach, I led you astray there because I asked for sort of like your closing thoughts, and then we did get another question. So I do want to get that out since
always.
We have, a few more minutes here. But the question was, how far are we from where price really becomes the only major decision in which meeting collaboration platform for clients to choose? And then Interop will develop to the same level as PBX from company A versus company B. Any thoughts on that one?
So, I mean, it's interesting, the point around commoditization of video conferencing technology. I'd say, from my perspective, it's a meeting's a meeting. And where we are with the software these days, whether you're using Teams, whether you're using BlueJeans, whether you're using Zoom, you can have a great meeting. You can meet with someone wherever they're in the world, and for the most part, be able to get your work done. I think where the differentiation is starting to play an important role is when you start thinking about meeting productivity. And you start thinking about some of the additional tools that can be brought into a meeting. So, last year, BlueJeans introduced something called Smart Meetings, which effectively was a way for you to create an ESPN-style Sports Center highlight reel of your meetings. Really powerful. When you can't make a meeting and you don't want to watch a 60-minute recording, you can chunk it down into 5 minutes and get all the great points, assign action items. Now, Zoom has come out with their version of highlights, and Microsoft Teams has meeting recaps. And where I see the industry going, and I see differentiation continue to exist, is thinking of different approaches and solutions to help individuals be more productive in their meetings. I think that, from a commoditization standpoint, we can all have meetings, and that's been so useful during the past 7 months. But what are some of the other capabilities that are going to help organizations be productive and be successful beyond just being able to meet? And, even though we've, I feel personally that what the work from home experience has done is it's all forced us into so many more meetings. And people generally don't like meetings. I think the general sentiment around having a meeting is not great. So how do we get people out of that vibe and into more of a position where they're being creative, they're being strategic, they're able to get their job done? The meeting pivots into something that you're just not kind of forced to sit through, but the tooling around the meeting allows you to do a better job. And I think, if we're able to do that and the other vendors are able to do that and create a different kind of virtual experience, then the commoditization changes, because it's not just about being able to connect to a remote participant. It's about being able to drive productivity. And I think each of the vendors is going to do their best to create that differentiation and that separation. But certainly we've seen a lot of consolidation in the industry. And I think that we're probably still going to see some more consolidation, but I think there are opportunities to grow. And I think if you look what we've done, and you look what Teams has done, you look what Zoom's done, what they announced yesterday, innovation is happening all around us. And I think that will, that'll kind of change the dynamics and the expectations of end users.
I think that's a great place to leave it. So, Zach, thanks again for all your insights over the period, and thanks to the audience for participating. And again, do download the resources from the console if you haven't already. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Tracy to close us out.
Oh, great! Thank you so much. I want to thank both of you, Scott and Zach, especially for that really interesting Q&A, and then, of course, Zach's presentation was great. So thank you both, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us, and we really appreciate you being here with us. I'd also like to thank the audience for attending this webcast, sponsored by BlueJeans by Verizon and presented by RedmondMag.com. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. This concludes the webcast.